I solemnly swear I'm up to no good. Hi, I'm Charles SirBookSage, and this is episode 11 of my 52-week Harry Potter first-time reread series. If this is your first time here, I am rereading the Harry Potter books for the very first time, and I've taken all 7 books, broken them up into 52 sections, and every Sunday I read a set of chapters, record my weekly thoughts on it, and upload that. This is my Monday video on my BookTube channel. I also have videos up every Wednesday and Friday as well, but Monday is my Harry Potter series. So please like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the comments down below. And now let's get into this week's chapters. This week we are reading The Flight of the Fat Lady, Grim Defeat, The Marauders Map, and The Firebolt. Chapter 8, Flight of the Fat Lady. So it's October, and that means Quidditch season is getting ready to begin. And you really have to feel for Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor team captain. He's in his final year at Hogwarts, his year 7, and he's just so desperate to win that Quidditch Cup, which he's been unable to get Gryffindor to do. And so he's got a lot of pressure on him, and he's putting a lot of pressure on the team, and the team really wants to win for him. And they've never lost a Quidditch match in a game that Harry has played on their team. They've only lost, since Harry's become the Seeker, they've only lost the games Harry wasn't able to be part of for. Because Harry was off, fighting Voldemort and doing things like that. But before we get into the Quidditch practices and all that stuff, we get from J.K. Rowling here more reminders of Scabbers. And just putting Scabbers back in the attention of the reader. And by Crookshank's never-ending attempts to get at him. And it's interesting dynamic here that's being created, because you have this sort of tension being built between Hermione and Ron over Crookshanks and Scabbers. But it also is kind of a subtle underplay between Hermione and Ron as people. While Rowling doesn't really focus on it in this book yet, she'll start to do that in future books. We've noticed Ron paying a lot more attention to Hermione in this book than the first two. And because they're starting to get older now, and while none of them are even thinking about it or recognizing it, that bond is starting to grow there between Hermione and Ron. Whenever they do get at each other's throats, there's more emotion behind it than there might otherwise be. And Rowling does this without really bringing it to anyone's attention. It's just she's just beginning to layer this stuff in. Now we also have the first weekend where students can go to Hogsmeade is coming up. And of course, Harry can't go. Dursley's wouldn't sign his permission slip. And he's all despondent about it. Hermione and Ron suggest to Harry that he should go and ask Professor McGonagall to see if, as head of Gryffindor House, she'll give him permission to go. So they go down to her office. There's a whole bunch of students there. And there's a sort of a funny little moment here where I think it's Lavender has learned that her pet rabbit back home has died. Lavender and the other students are now all convinced even more that Professor Trelawney's divinations are all true, and then everything she claimed is going to happen, which means, of course, Harry's going to die and all this crazy stuff. And Hermione remains completely skeptical. But the more important part here is Harry is not given permission. Professor McGonagall won't let him go, and that's just tough. But everyone else goes off, and Harry's alone, and he's kind of wandering around, really kind of feeling sorry for himself. And then there's a nice little scene here where he comes across Professor Lupin in an office. And Lupin kind of brings him in, and they have just a quick conversation. And Lupin is another favorite of mine from this series. He's so kind and compassionate and really insightful, and you can tell that there are things that are bothering Harry, and he gets Harry to open up finally. And Harry's had this sort of self-doubts about himself since the Dementor made him faint on the train, and the boggart, when Professor Lupin jumped in the boggart's way and wouldn't let Harry try to confront it. And he asked Lupin straight out about it. And Lupin's response, which surprises Harry, it wasn't that he didn't think Harry could handle it. He just thought it would be a bad idea for a boggart to turn into looking like Voldemort, that it would kind of freak everybody out. And then Harry surprises Lupin by telling Lupin, I was thinking of the Dementors, not Voldemort, which really impresses Lupin. And he looks at Harry and he goes, so you fear fear rather than any particular person or thing. which is a better way to look at fear. But it's a nice little moment. And then we get more foreshadowing here because Snape shows up with a sort of steaming potion because Lupin is looking haggard and a bit ill. And Lupin tells him that Snape's been kind enough to make this complicated potion for me to help me out with my illness. And Harry, of course, always suspecting Snape, is starting to fear that it's poisoned, but is smart enough in the end to not actually say that. But Ron and Hermione are back. They're loaded with candy, and they tell him all about Hogsmeade and all the wonderful things he can't go see. And then they're off down to the Halloween feast. And all the holidays in Harry Potter books are pretty awesome. There's pumpkins everywhere and bats flying around in the Great Hall. But the more important part here, and this is where the chapter ends, and this is where we kick the tension up a notch, is when they're all going back to their Gryffindor tower, to the common room. Nobody can get in. And there's this big crowd around the painting of the Fat Lady. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione are in the back. They can't see. And then I think Percy says, somebody go get Dumbledore, and you know something's wrong. And Dumbledore shows up, some of the other teachers show up, and then Harry, Hermione, and Ron kind of push their way up and finally see. And the Fat Lady's nowhere to be found. She's ran off from the painting, and the painting's been shredded by something. And then the ghost Peeves shows up, tells them that it was Sirius Black, that Black wanted to get in, and the Fat Lady wouldn't let him, so Sirius attacked the painting. And that's how the chapter ends. So now we know Sirius Black has somehow managed to escape the Dementors, escape Azkaban, elude detection, get past the whole ring of Dementors surrounding Hogwarts, and make it all the way inside the castle and all the way up to the Fat Lady's painting that guards the entrance to Gryffindor Tower, without anybody seeing him. Which, of course, really ratchets up the tension in the whole story. So next chapter is Chapter 9, Grim Defeat. And I like to play on the word grim. We'll see it has a double meaning here. And nighttime has come now, so Hogwarts, the teachers gather the entire school, all the students, in the Great Hall. And Dumbledore uses his wand, pushes all the tables out of the way, and sleeping bags pop up for everybody. And every student is going to spend the night in the Great Hall and sleep there, because the teachers are going to scour Hogwarts from top to bottom, looking for Sirius Black, in case he's still inside the castle somewhere. Harry, Ron, and Hermione kind of pull their little sleeping bags off to the side. And later that night, Dumbledore comes back in, and then so does Snape, and they're talking to Percy. And Snape suggests that the only way Black could have gotten in is if he had inside help from someone in the school. And Snape starts to bring up the fact that he's always objected to this particular person that Dumbledore's hired, and Dumbledore shuts him down right there before Snape mentions who he's talking about. But Harry hears that, and now Harry's wondering who could be helping Sirius Black. But now we're back to Quidditch in this chapter, and it's a day or two before the match. There's this huge storm coming in, and the weather conditions are going to be absolutely atrocious. And Slytherin backs out of the match, claiming Draco's arm still isn't completely healed. And they have to play Hufflepuff instead, which just freaks Oliver Wood out, because they've been spending weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks planning to play Slytherin, and now they have to play Hufflepuff, which is a completely different strategy set. And I completely forgot that Cedric Diggory is in this book. I'm so used to just the movies, where he's in the Goblet of Fire movie, but not in, I don't remember him ever being in the Prisoner of Azkaban movie. And it just shows you how much of the story I remember only from the movies now, since, again, I've only read these books that one time. So that was an interesting kind of surprise for me, and a nice surprise. And it makes sense in the overarching series that because Cedric Diggory plays such an important role in the very next book, to set him up and introduce him here in this book makes sense from a writing perspective, at least I think. Harry ends up 10 minutes late to Defense Against the Dark Arts because of this. And this is an interesting scene here, and he comes in to find Professor Snape there, filling in for a sick Professor Lupin. And we really get, like, the worst parts of Snape's personality we see on full display in this chapter. He spends the class just belittling Lupin in front of all the students, and decides, just because he's an ass, that they're going to learn werewolves, even though that's way down the curriculum for what they're supposed to be learning. And we'll learn by the end of the book why Snape has chosen werewolves here. But we do get the worst part of Snape's character, because Snape, the bad side of Snape, the weak part of Snape, he punishes, again, I've mentioned it before, he punishes these kids for his own, like, trauma that he experienced in school. Because many of their parents, like, treated him like garbage and made fun of him, he now punishes their kids for it, which is really, just really petty and weak. But this is the downside of Snape. He has other good qualities, but this is the bad qualities of him. And he's extremely rude and mean to Hermione here. And I'm actually going to read that little moment here, because, one, it's just really well written. I like what's portrayed here by Rowling in this little passage. "That's the second time you've spoken out of turn, Miss Granger," said Snape coolly. 5 more points from Gryffindor for being an insufferable know-it-all." Hermione went very red, put down her hand, and stared at the floor with her eyes full of tears. It was a mark of how much the class loathed Snape that they were all glaring at him, because every one of them had called Hermione a know-it-all at least once. And Ron, who told Hermione she was a know-it-all at least twice a week, said loudly, "You asked us a question, and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told?" The class knew instantly he'd gone too far. Snape advanced on Ron slowly, and the room held its breath. I just love the way Rowling wrote that little moment. And we get more here of her starting very subtly here to layer in the bond that's going to grow between Ron and Hermione as this story continues throughout these books. And it's one of the things you have to love about the Weasleys is when they know they're in the right, they will stand up to anybody. And consequences be damned, they'll deal with the consequences to do the right thing. And it's an endearing quality in that whole family, that when it matters, they're going to be there for you. Even if it means punishment for them, they don't care. Doing right matters more than not getting in trouble to them. Again, it's the worst parts of Snape on display, because these are little kids, and they don't need to be treated that way. But next up, we finally get the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and now Hufflepuff. And it is a torrential storm. Harry can barely see anything. He's trying to up above, and there's like lightning flashes, and he thinks he sees like this big black dog sort of silhouetted at the top of one of the bleachers, just for a moment, and then it's gone. He can barely see. They call timeout, and Hermione does a little spell to fix his glasses so that it's waterproof, so the water will wash off it so he can see again. And the snitch finally appears, and he and Cedric are going to race towards it, but that's when all of a sudden all the Dementors show up. And again, everything goes cold, and just all joy and everything goes out, sucked out of you. And Harry hears the screaming again. And this time he hears more than a woman's scream. He actually hears snippets of that moment right before his mother's death, where she was pleading for Harry's life to Voldemort, and Voldemort laughing at her as he kills her. The next thing Harry knows, he wakes up in the hospital. Now, one of the little, and it's a little moment here that we get is, and it's a character moment for Cedric, that when Cedric had seen, because Cedric catches the snitch, but when he saw, he was able to catch it because of the Dementors and Harry falling, and Dumbledore had saved Harry's, cushioned his fall. Cedric doesn't want the victory. He's like, no, let's cancel it and we'll do a rematch. But the victory stands, the victory is the victory, so Hufflepuff wins. Which really makes Harry feel bad. It's freaking Oliver Wood out, because now they have to have luck, not just skill on their side, to be able to win the cup. They have to hope that Ravenclaw just trounces Hufflepuff in the next match by enough points to kind of give Gryffindor the chance to catch up. If Gryffindor wins out, they have a chance at winning the cup, but it requires them to win out and Hufflepuff to lose at least once extremely badly. So, which again is freaking Wood out. The worst part for Harry, though, is he learns that his Nimbus 2000 has been destroyed by the Whomping Willow. Which, couple of things here. One, that's worse than losing the match even for Harry in some ways. But two, the Whomping Willow is brought back into the reader's mind again. And it's important because it comes into play in this book later in the finale. So, really nicely done here by Rowling in this chapter by taking advantage of that moment of, well, let's have Harry's broomstick destroyed and we'll have the Whomping Willow do it. And it brings the Whomping Willow back. And that's how chapter 9 ends. And again, like I mentioned, grim defeat. I like the double meaning of the chapter. Losing the match is a grim defeat. But seeing the Grim, the dog, again, starts playing with Harry's mind and messing with his mind. But really well done chapter. Now we have chapter 10, the Marauders Map. This is a really big chapter. This is a really good chapter and an important chapter in the book. An important chapter in the whole Harry Potter mythology as well, because we are introduced to the Marauders Map in this chapter, which is just, as far as all the little sort of magical gizmos and gadgets, the one that I'd want the most if I was at Hogwarts would be this Marauders Map. I think it's the one you can really get the most use out of. And now you kind of are given an insight into just how Fred and George are kind of able to get away with as much as they get away with. But the start of the chapter, Harry spends the rest of the weekend in the hospital. And he's kind of upset and feels bad, but he's figured out that the screams and everything that the Dementors make him relive that moment of his mother's death. Like it's somehow pulling those memories out of his head and making him experience them again. But he's finally out of the hospital wing, and of course, cue Draco Malfoy being Draco Malfoy. He's magically healed completely now, of course, and Draco is. And he is just enjoying every moment of Gryffindor's defeat and making fun incessantly again of Harry and Dementors. He's just reveling in Harry's failure. Again, we're back to class now. And we actually get a lot of class time in this book. A lot more than I remember in the first two books, because we had little snippets of class here and there in the first two books. But in this book, in Prisoner of Azkaban, we actually spent a lot of time in the classroom. But because in this particular book, the teachers, like Lupin in particular, plays a prominent role in how events play out at the end of this particular book. It makes sense to include them and not just kind of tertiary characters, but to be directly involved in the story. It makes sense. But Lupin's back. He's looking a bit haggard. You can tell that he's been very ill. And when he learns of Snape's treatment, one of the things that Snape had told him is they had to do like a whole essay on werewolves, like 2 complete parchment rolls. And Lupin tells them that they don't have to worry about that, and you're not going to have to do that homework. And of course, Hermione is the only one upset about that because she's already done it, which is typical Hermione. But in this chapter, we get another conversation between Professor Lupin and Harry about the Dementors, because I think they have a private conversation again. And I'm going to read that section here. I really, really like how Lupin describes the Dementors and what they are. Dementors are among the foulest creatures that walk this earth. They infest the darkest, filthiest places. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. Even Muggles feel their presence, though they can't see them. Get too near a Dementor, and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you to something like itself, soulless and evil. And the worst that happened to you, Harry, is enough to make anyone fall off their broom. You have nothing to feel ashamed of. And at Harry's pleading, because he remembers that Lupin kind of pushed the Dementor out of the train car with something he did with his wand, Lupin agrees that he'll teach him how to do that kind of magic to defend himself against the Dementor. But not until next term. There's way too much to do, so that'll be the next term. He'll teach him how to do it. And now December's here. It's Christmas. Break is nearing. Ron and Hermione decide they're going to spend their Christmas break at Hogwarts. They each make up their own excuses as to why, but Harry knows that they want to be with him, since Sirius Black is trying to kill him, and they don't want Harry to spend Christmas alone, because Harry's been so dejected. Right before Christmas, it's another trip to Hogsmeade for everyone but Harry. And this is where we have one of my favorite things in the story. Again, Fred and George to the rescue. Harry's wandering around alone in the castle by himself, and there's Fred and George kind of pop out of a room and call him inside. And they present to him the Marauders Map and teach him how to open it and then how to close it. And they point out to Harry that there are 7 secret passages between Hogwarts and Hogsmeade. And I believe 4 of them Filch knows about. And the other 3, one of those tunnels is collapsed, so it's unusable. The second one comes out under the Whomping Willow, so there's no point in that one. And then there's this third one that comes up underneath the, and I forget the name of the store, but one of the sweet shop, I think. It comes up, Honeysuckle or something. So that's the one they suggest Harry can use to sneak off to Hogsmeade. And that they don't need the map anymore. They pretty much have it memorized. They know where all these things are. And we get a really cool moment here, because Rowling takes the time to show the reader, and as she shows Harry, that you can see where everybody is in the castle. And what I really liked in the book is, and they did this completely different in the movie. In the book, there's an entrance to this passageway. There's this sort of humpback witch statue in the hallway that the statue somehow opens up, and you can get in and get down into this tunnel that'll take you to Hogsmeade. And Harry has no idea how to open it, and then he sees the little Harry drawing of himself standing next to the drawing of the statue, and he sees like a sort of conversation bubble, and the map Harry says the word that opens up the statue, and then Harry repeats it, and the statue opens up. So I thought that was really, really cool. Now, in the movie, from what I remember, Harry puts on his invisibility cloak and goes to Hogsmeade with his cloak on. He doesn't do that here in the book. He just sneaks in without his cloak and ends up, there's so many people on there, nobody notices him. And he ends up meeting up with Ron and Harry and Hermione, and then they go to the 3 broomsticks. And yes, the 3 broomsticks to get some hot butterbeer. And they're kind of sitting all the way in this little corner there, and then in walks Professor McGonagall and Hagrid and Professor Flitwick and the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. And Harry hides under a table really quickly, and Hermione kind of shifts the Christmas tree to block their view, so the teachers don't realize that any of them are there. And they all sit down at a table, and so Harry's underneath the table with Ron and Hermione listening to this conversation. And then you learn a lot more about what they all believe happened that night that Voldemort killed Harry's parents. And you learn that Sirius Black was Harry's father's best friend, their best man at their wedding, Harry's godfather, and there was some sort of spell kind of thing that they could do, the Secret Keeper thing, where they could stay hidden by putting the secret of where they're hiding inside a person, and Sirius Black became that person. So that if you couldn't get Sirius Black to tell you where they were, you would never know. You would be standing like outside their door, and you would never know they were in there. And it was protection against Voldemort. And then the belief that Snape had betrayed them was really supporting you-know-who, and sold them out, and they were killed. And what was interesting here is here's Peter Pettigrew's name is finally brought up again, and how they all believe that Pettigrew valiantly tried to confront Sirius Black, and of course got killed by Black. But so Pettigrew dies a hero, is given some like medal after the fact, and the only witnesses to that fight happening where Black supposedly kills these muggles and kills Pettigrew are a couple of other muggles, and then their minds are wiped, memories of it are wiped. So not a lot of real evidence to confirm Sirius Black's guilt, but Black is just kind of lost it at this point, and he just allows himself to be taken away to Azkaban. And an interesting note here is Cornelius Fudge is talking about how the last time he had visited Black, Black was the only prisoner in Azkaban who didn't seem the least bit bothered by the Dementors. He was just acting normal, like he was at a hotel and not a jail with Dementors, and everyone else was kind of half mad and half crazy from them. It's a really lot of information here. Hagrid is particularly upset here because he recounts how the first person he encountered after he took the baby Harry out of the house was Sirius Black showing up on his flying motorcycle, and how Black wanted to take Harry to safety, and Hagrid was like, no, I'm bringing him to Dumbledore. So Sirius gave him his flying motorcycle and said, I'm not going to need it anymore. And now Hagrid's all mad because he didn't recognize that Sirius Black was evil, and he wished he could have taken him there himself. But a lot of information is thrown in here. We have some of the stuff we heard earlier, but now we get the sort of full tale of what everyone believes happened that night. That whole scene where Harry is kind of stuck under the table listening to all this stuff, this is like a great setup for the finale, because you've been hearing rumors, and now you get the full tale. One of the things that Rowling is good at, she did it in the first two books, and she's doing it here, particularly in this scene, is to give Harry, Hermione, and Ron, and the reader, a really big misdirect on purpose. She wants you to believe these set of facts are true, so she can then pull the rug out from under you with her reveal at the end, so when you learn what's really happening. And this is a really, really big one. Because in the first two books, there were, it was dangerous and all those things. But this is extremely personal for Harry, because this is his family. And this was the man who everyone believed was their best friend. But that's how Chapter 10 ends. And then again, it is a great setup. And now we are on to Chapter 11, the Firebolt. And now Harry can't get images of Sirius Black betraying his parents out of his head. This next day here, it's Christmas holiday, so there's very few people left in the school. I think there's Harry, Ron, Hermione, and 3 other students. But Hermione is insistent because she knows Harry. She's like, promise me you're not going to go looking for Sirius Black. She's pleading with him. He will kill you. Don't do it. But Harry just can't get past everything that's happened, everything he's learned. And this is where we learn, Ron tells Harry here that all they had found left of Peter Pettigrew was one finger, which again is a great foreshadowing moment by Rowling, again, to set up a little bit of tidbit to put back in the reader's mind that Pettigrew, obviously, the rest of his body was destroyed and all that remained is the finger. And which, of course, plays a role, because what's missing? A finger. But that's later. But Harry decides he's going to confront Hagrid, because he's mad at Hagrid that Hagrid never told him about Sirius Black and what happened. They don't think it's a good idea, but they go with him anyway. And when they get there, they find just a completely distraught Hagrid, just crying and everything. And they realize he shows them a letter from the Ministry, and Buckbeak is in serious trouble. Hagrid gets to keep his job, but Buckbeak is being turned over to face an inquiry from the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, which pretty much means that Buckbeak is a goner. And Hagrid's just completely distraught about it. So Hermione, Ron, and Harry decide they're going to research case history and see if they can find a precedent for something like this to help legally get Buckbeak spared so Buckbeak isn't killed. And it kind of distracts Harry. He can't confront Hagrid when Hagrid's in so much pain. And then it's Christmas time. And I'm going to read a quick little passage here of the description for Christmas, because it's impossible to read these Harry Potter books without, particularly Christmas, more even than Halloween, having such a prominent presence. Even if it's just for a moment in a chapter, it still stands out. And I think part of that might also be because of the movies, but it really does stand out in the books. These are, story-wise, they're moments of kind of like that calm before you get into the finale. Because most of this crazy stuff seems to happen in the tail end of the year a lot of the times, or at least after the holidays, in the second term, not the first term of each year. But I'm going to read the little passage here. Meanwhile, in the rest of the castle, the usual magnificent Christmas decorations had been put up, despite the fact that hardly any of the students remained to enjoy them. Thick streamers of holly and mistletoe were strung along the corridors, mysterious lights shone from inside every suit of armor, and the great hall was filled with its usual 12 Christmas trees, glittering with golden stars. A powerful and delicious smell of cooking pervaded the corridors, and by Christmas Eve it had grown so strong that even Scabbers poked his nose out from the shelter of Ron's pocket to sniff hopefully at the air. And again, just a wonderful, you can visualize Hogwarts with the Christmas decorations and the lights and the glowing and the smells of all those like Christmas meals. It's just a nice little passage that I've always liked. So, and now it's Christmas Day. Sweaters from Mrs. Weasley, of course. But the big present Harry gets is an anonymous person has given him the new Firebolt. Now, this is the broomstick that I think it was all the way back in chapter 4 when Harry spent the month of August at the Leaky Cauldron. And he would go down a Diagon Alley and keep staring at the Firebolt, which is at this particular time, the best broomstick in the world. So someone has given it to him, and it's anonymous. And Hermione, being Hermione, she's like, let's just not hop on this broom. It could be jinxed. It could be given to you to harm you. So she knows something's wrong, or she suspects something's wrong with it. Because they're all looking out for Harry. Harry has a tendency to not recognize potential danger, which isn't really good sometimes for him, because it's a skill he really kind of needs to start developing here. But he doesn't seem to have developed it yet. He can pick up when he suspects danger for somebody else, like suspecting the potion from Snape might harm Lupin and things like that, but he seems oblivious when it's danger to himself. Now, an interesting little moment here is, yet again, Crookshanks goes leaping at Ron trying to get at Scabbers, and the sneakoscope pops out of the trunk and starts making that whirring noise. And Crookshanks does not like that sound at all. And I was wondering, because I remember when the sneakoscope popped up, and I think it was in the Leaky Cauldron chapter as well, I remember remarking that this seems like an odd thing to just point out so specifically, and that I imagine it's going to play a role. Now, I can't imagine this is it. I'm hoping still that the sneakoscope is still going to play a role. I've only read this book once, many years ago, so I don't remember if it does or not. But I like the fact that it at least makes a new appearance here, which, again, is Rowling putting it in the reader's mind, bringing it back to the reader's attention. So, because I'm assuming it's going to be used some point in this second half of the book. And this is when Harry really gets his first, real long look at Scabbers in a while, because Ron has been keeping Scabbers in his pockets, hidden from Crookshanks. And Scabbers has gone from kind of a nice, chunky, fat, healthy-looking rat to really sickly-looking, and he's starting to think that Scabbers might die soon. Rowling slips back in again nicely that Scabbers has an unnaturally long life, and then Harry surmises that unless Scabbers has powers they don't know about, that long life might be finally coming to an end. And again, really nicely well done by Rowling here to not just keep having Scabbers in our minds, but to bring back up that he's got an unnatural lifespan. Really nicely done here to kind of bring these things back in case the reader has forgotten that Scabbers has an unnaturally long life. But it's time for Christmas dinner. They go down to the Great Hall. There's only one big set of tables in the middle because there's only the professors, 3 other students, and Harry, Hermione, and Ron. And they all sit down and have dinner together. The only 2 people who aren't there initially are Lupin, because he's sick again, and Professor Trelawney. And there's an interesting conversation about the table. They're talking about Lupin. And they're not just coming right out and saying what they all know about Lupin's condition and everything. And it's really interesting to have that kind of conversation for them to dance around the topic because there's students with them. Christmas dinner's over. Harry and Ron go back to the Gryffindor Tower, but Hermione remains behind and then shows up later with Professor McGonagall. And Professor McGonagall confiscates the Firebolt and says, you can have it back in a few weeks, but we've got to basically tear this thing apart and make sure that it's not jinxed or cursed or in any way to harm you. Harry's just completely pissed off, and Hermione's furious at them. It's Harry, Sirius Black may have sent this broom to you, knowing you'd hop on it and get yourself killed. She's actually, again, thinking and concerned, where Harry just is blind to dangers to himself, like I mentioned earlier. And that's where the chapter ends. And a really good set of chapters here. We get the tension ratcheted up by knowing Sirius Black has breached the castle and he's gotten into the castle. And still a bit more setup. It's Rowling kind of layering back in, bringing back up important little pieces we're going to need for the end. The Whomping Willow, in particular, has kind of made multiple reappearances here in these chapters of mentions. And particularly the secret passage that comes up where the Whomping Willow is. And a nice little tidbit about the tree was planted the year Professor Lupin started as a student. Important little thing, and I'm just kind of hitting me right now about that moment. If that secret passage has been there all along, Lupin was there right before the tree was planted. So here's how we can know that Lupin knows about this passage himself, because the tree wasn't in its way. And it just kind of hit me now. I didn't catch it while I was reading it, but that kind of makes sense. A nice set of chapters. I love the whole kind of... Rowling tends to move Halloween and Christmas. She usually condenses this part of the school year down really fast. We move through winter pretty quickly because there's a lot less happening in winter. Because, one, this is in Scotland, and it's apparently, really bad weather and brutal and vicious and cold and snow. So there's not an opportunity for a lot to happen. So again, this is the 3rd book in a row. Halloween and Christmas goes by very, very quickly. But that's okay, because we're now getting to the second semester, the second term, as we get to the second half of the book. So next week, we have chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15. The Patronus, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw, Snape's Grudge, and the Quidditch Final. So I've now read 11 of the 22 chapters, so I am at the halfway point of the book, which is about right, considering, we just generally hit Halloween, Christmas, right around the halfway point of the book. So next week, we start off again with chapter 12 of the Patronus, and it is time, finally, next week for me to go to the Pottermore website and do the Patronus quiz to see which Patronus I get. I went and did the quiz for the wand when I started this, and I think I have a wand similar to Draco's. But I've been holding off on doing the Patronus quiz, waiting for when I got to the Patronus chapter in Prisoner of Azkaban. I don't know if it's going to be in my Harry Potter video next week, the Patronus reveal for me, or if I'm going to do that as a separate little video. I'm not really sure yet, but there will be video content of me learning what my Patronus is going to be. So looking forward to that. I've been waiting a couple of months to get to this point, but I wanted to save it for this chapter next week. So again, nice set of chapters here. Still a little bit more set up where we're getting ready to enter into the second half of the book. The tension's been ratcheted up because Sirius Black is there somewhere. But that's it. That's a really good set of chapters. I'm just going to wrap this up here. I want to hear from you in the comments what you thought of this particular set of chapters. We're halfway through the Prisoner of Azkaban book, and what your thoughts are on that first half of the book. Again, I'm really, really loving this book. The writing, again, has taken another step up. This is book 3 now, and each time Rowling's writing just gets better and better and better. But anyway, that's it here. I am Charles the SirBookSage, mischief managed, and happy reading.